So, um, did you know that money isn't really a limited thing? Like, not gold sitting in some vault. It actually gets created, well, pretty much every day.
Yeah, sounds almost like magic, doesn't it? It's one of those things that really shifts your perspective.
Absolutely. It's kind of the tip of the iceberg for the surprising stuff we're going to explore today.
That's right. We often think of the economy as, this fixed machine, a certain amount of fuel, maybe, but the source material we're using today shows it's much more, well, that dynamic and frankly a more human thing than we often realize.
Exactly. So today's deep dive, it's pulling insights from Tout, l'économie, ou presque. That's by Hugh Recca, published back in 2020.
Hmm.
And this book, it's packed, really broad look at economics, from the real basic principles right up to, like, the complexities of financial markets.
Think of it as getting a backstage pass, maybe, to see how the whole economic show really works behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Our goal here is to sort of navigate through all that information, pull out the really crucial bits.
In a way that's clear, right, and interesting, and helps you understand the forces shaping our world without getting totally bogged down in jargon.
We want to give you that shortcut, basically,
Mm.
to feeling, properly informed.
Yeah.
So we're going to be diving into some really fascinating areas, like the connection between economics and politics. It's kind of surprising.
Uh,
We'll unravel how money gets created daily, figure out what GDP really tells us, and just as importantly, what it doesn't.
right. And also look at why economies sometimes wobble, the causes of crises, and even get a little peek into financial markets.
Okay, let's jump right in then. The book kicks off with this really fundamental point. Economics is political, like right at its core.
That's right. And the author uses this brilliant analogy with chess. Think about it, the rules of chess are totally made up, aren't they?
Yeah, completely arbitrary.
You could just decide, okay, the king now moves like a knight. And suddenly, poof, every strategy, every opening move, everything just changes.
Right. And the point is, with economics, it's similar. The decisions about what we even focus on, what we measure.
Yeah, and how we decide what's good or bad for the economy. Those are political choices.
So why is GDP growth the big star? Rather than say how happy people are or how healthy or how evenly wealth is spread out.
Exactly. The very act of saying, okay, we're going to prioritize GDP growth above all else, well, that is a political statement.
Even if it's often presented as just, the natural order of things, the way it has to be in capitalism.
It's like saying in our chess game, the only thing that matters is capturing the most pawns. Doesn't matter what happens to the king, just get those pawns.
The book then touches on this kind of democratic ideal, the idea that, ideally, the people, we should decide what that ideal society looks like. What are our goals, our priorities?
And then economists should be trying to figure out the best set of rules, the best policies to actually get us there.
Which leads to some really deep questions, doesn't it?
It really does. Like, are these economic laws we talk about,
Yeah.
are they as fixed as, say, the laws of gravity?
Or can we change them?
Yeah. And are there some things a society might wish for that are just impossible, no matter how we tinker with the economic rule book?
It really makes you think about what's fixed and what's, well, flexible in our economic world. Which brings us neatly to something that often feels pretty fixed. Money.
Ah, money.
We've all heard it, right? Money doesn't grow on trees. Creates this image of, like, a limited pie we all have to fight for.
But the book just throws a massive wrench into that whole idea.
It really does.
It directly challenges that scarcity notion, says money is created, well, every single day.
That forces you to just stop and reconsider everything, doesn't it? The whole idea of limited resources in the economy. It's a real aha moment.
Definitely. The book takes a critical look at what it calls the intermediary theory of banks.
Right. The picture we usually have. Banks take deposits from savers, lend that same money out to borrowers. Simple go-betweens.
Yeah, and it points out that even, big international institutions often use economic models that kind of oversimplify things this way.
But what's fascinating is, as the book says, this simple model doesn't actually explain how any new money gets into the economy.
Exactly. If banks are just shuffling existing funds around, where did the original money come from? Where did that first domino, where did it start?
It's a puzzle if you stick to that simple view.
Yeah.
So the book then introduces the theory of fractional reserves.
Okay, sounds a bit technical.
It does, but the basic idea is that banks only need to keep a fraction of their deposits available as ready cash or reserves.
Right, and the sort of traditional explanation was that when someone deposits money, The bank lends out the rest, and that gets deposited and lent out again, supposedly multiplying the money.
But the book highlights something really crucial here. The money you see in your bank account. It's not physical cash in a vault with your name on it.
No, it's more like an IOU from the bank, a promise of availability, as the book puts it.
So when you deposit money, you're basically lending it to the bank. And they promise to give it back when you ask.
And if they can't fulfill that promise, if they don't have enough liquid funds when lots of people ask at once, well, that's when a bank gets into serious trouble, a bank run.
That's a really important distinction. It shows how much our system is built on, well, trust.
Mm.
And the banks keeping their promises.
Mm-hmm. Now, the book also notes that both this intermediary theory and the sort of simplified fractional reserve idea, they still kind of suggest banks are just middlemen.
Yeah, and that the total amount of money is somehow separate from, everyday economic activity, like it's set from outside.
Right. And this is where the theory of ex nihilo money creation comes in.
Ex nihilo sounds fancy. Latin.
No, basically means out of nothing. This theory argues that when a bank actually makes a loan, approves your mortgage, say, it creates new money, digitally, right there on the spot.
Wow. Not from deposits.
Not necessarily, no. It creates new account entries, new purchasing power. And when that loan gets repaid, the money effectively disappears again. Poof.
So scriptural money, like entries in a ledger.
Exactly. So when you get that mortgage, or a business gets a loan to build a factory, the bank isn't always just pulling funds from someone else's savings. They're creating new spending power.
Out of thin air.
Well, out of the promise to repay, backed by collateral usually. But yes, effectively creating new digital money.
Okay. So what about the central bank then? Where do they fit in?
Good question. The central bank provides what's called central bank money. That's the physical cash we use, but also the electronic balances that the commercial banks hold at the central bank.
Their reserve accounts.
Precisely. And banks use this central bank money to settle payments between themselves. So if your bank owes my bank money at the end of the day, they use their central bank reserves to square things up.
Okay, that makes sense.
But here's where it gets really mind-bending, as the book emphasizes. These regular deposit banks, your high street bank, they actually control a huge chunk of the money supply.
Through making loans.
Yes. They can create as many of these digital promises, these loans, as they find credit-worthy borrowers for, pretty much, as long as they meet those reserve requirements set by the central bank.
So the central bank sets the rules, like the reserve ratio.
Right, but it's also under some pressure to provide enough central bank money when needed. Because if they don't, and banks suddenly can't settle payments with each other.
The whole system could seize up.
Exactly. You could get gridlock, potentially bank runs, failures. It's a serious risk. So they tend to supply the liquidity the system needs.
So the massive takeaway here is the amount of money in the economy isn't some fixed pie. It's not inherently scarce like we think.
Not in the way we usually imagine, no. It largely depends on the demand for credit. How much do individuals, businesses, governments want to borrow?
If there's not much demand for loans, the money creation engines at the banks just aren't running as fast.
Precisely. And this really turns that money doesn't grow on trees idea on its head in many situations, doesn't it?
It certainly does. The book even argues that an economy that gets too focused on just paying down bank debt, it's actually hurting itself.
Because it's destroying those promises, that scriptural money. That actually fuels economic activity. It's a totally different way of thinking about it all.
Definitely a huge shift in perspective for, well, probably most of us. Okay, so we've got this new handle on how money gets created. Now let's talk about how we measure, well, everything. GDP.
Right, gross domestic product. Often seen as the ultimate economic scorecard, isn't it?
It is. But first, the book clarifies a really important accounting idea. Accounting measures the value of things, the stocks of wealth, in money terms.
Mm-hmm. And it's crucial, as the book says, not to confuse that stock with the flow.
Right, like your bathtub example. The water in the tub is the stock total wealth. The water flowing in and out, that's the flow. That's like GDP measured over a year.
Yeah, the book gives a great example. The total value of all the companies listed on the U.S. stock market might be, what, trillions?
Huge numbers, yeah.
But the actual amount of dollars, physical and digital, circulating in the world is much, much less. That stock market value is potential worth, not necessarily liquid cash ready to spend.
That's a great distinction.
Mm-hmm.
So with that difference between stock and flow in mind, The main goal for most modern economies is to maximize GDP, right? That flow.
Pretty much, yes.
Hmm.
And the book explains GDP can be calculated in 3 ways that should, in theory, add up to the same number.
Okay, what are they?
You can sum up all the spending on final goods and services, or you can sum up all the value added by every business at each stage of production, or you can sum up all the income earned by everyone.
And that income, it breaks down into two main types.
Broadly, yes. Labor income, so salaries and wages, and capital income, the money you get from owning assets. Things like profits for shareholders, rent for property owners, interest for lenders.
The book uses a simple example, doesn't it? With just workers and shareholders.
It does, yeah. To show how the total value of what's produced the GDP ends up as someone's income, whether it's wages or profits.
And then that income allows people to spend, which drives the next round of production.
Exactly. And it also implicitly shows how the distribution of that income, how much goes to labor versus capital, affects who can buy what and therefore what gets produced.
Then you've got the government in the mix, too.
Yeah.
It collects taxes. That's its revenue.
Uh-huh.
And then it spends that money on public sector salaries, maybe Social Security, building roads, infrastructure.
Right. And the book points out that this government spending and taxation forms a kind of closed loop within that overall GDP calculation. It's part of the flow.
So the really key thing to remember is GDP measures a flow of activity over a period, like a year.
And crucially, some of what's in GDP, like services, a haircut, legal advice, it can't be stored. It's consumed as it's produced.
Unlike, say, a car or a house.
Exactly. The book helpfully breaks down the economy into like 3 contributing areas for GDP.
Yep.
There's the environment, our natural resources, then stored wealth, that's our knowledge, our machines, infrastructure, and then human activity extracting resources, manufacturing, services.
That helps visualize it. And it mentions that toaster and bicycle example.
Oh, yeah, that really brings home the energy dependence, doesn't it? Even a really fit cyclist pedaling hard can barely generate enough power to toast one slice of bread properly.
It makes you realize just how much our modern GDP relies on easily available, dense energy sources, not human muscle power.
Absolutely. And it turns out a chunk of that GDP isn't even about creating new stuff.
What do you mean?
It's about maintenance, fixing the things we already have. What economists call the depreciation of capital. Roads crumble, machines wear out.
So some economic activity is just keeping our existing stock of wealth from, well, falling apart.
Exactly. Now, even though GDP is this huge, widely used number, the book goes into quite some detail about the things it doesn't tell us, its limitations.
Right. And they're pretty significant, aren't they?
They really are. For one, it completely ignores environmental damage. How do you put a dollar value on clean air or biodiversity?
Yeah, the book talks about how hard it is to create markets for things like pollution rights and how GDP just doesn't subtract the costs of damaging the environment.
It also totally overlooks unpaid work. Think about parents raising children, people caring for elderly relatives, volunteers.
All incredibly valuable to society. But because no money changes hands, it doesn't show up in GDP stats.
None of it. And then there's inequality. GDP per person is just an average.
Right, it can look great for a country overall, but it could be hiding massive disparities. A few super rich people and lots of people struggling.
Exactly. The average masks the distribution. Plus, the book points out issues with how we even calculate GDP accurately. Inflation is a big one.
How so?
Well, trying to figure out if the price of, say, a new phone went up because it's genuinely better or just because of general inflation, that's really tricky. Getting that wrong can distort our view of real growth.
And choosing a different base here for comparing prices can apparently change the growth numbers too.
Yeah, it's a bit arbitrary sometimes. And the book also mentions how asset price bubbles, like in housing, can inflate GDP through things like real estate agent commissions and fees, even if no new real wealth or productive capacity has actually been created. It's just existing assets changing hands at higher prices.
That's subtle.
And finally, GDP doesn't account for wealth that isn't traded in the market. Natural resources just sitting there. Free online services we use every day, they don't count until they're exploited or monetized.
Which leads to those weird comparisons the book makes, like building bombs adds more to GDP than charitable work.
It's quite perverse when you think about it that way.
So, okay, with all these really serious flaws, why is growing GDP still the main goal for pretty much every government?
Well, the book suggests it's almost become a political necessity. Promising GDP growth lets politicians offer the hope of rising incomes for everyone.
without having to make tough choices about redistributing existing wealth or fundamentally changing the system.
Exactly. It's a way to try and keep social tensions down, promise a bigger pie eventually, even if the slices remain unequal. It's a powerful narrative.
Okay, that makes a kind of political sense, even if it's economically flawed. So we get money creation, we get GDP. Now, let's move to the darker side, the threat of economic crisis.
Right. Always lurking, isn't it? The book explains crises as basically disruptions to that normal flow of the economy we talked about.
It uses that image, right? A lake covered in thin ice.
Yeah, as long as the weight's spread out, it holds. But if too much pressure builds up in one spot, like too much debt in one sector, the ice can crack, the flow stops.
And it's not just financial stuff, is it? The book also says if people just stop cooperating.
Right, like mass strikes or, a pandemic that stops people working or spending, that can trigger crises too by hitting either the supply of goods or the demand for them.
Makes sense. What's really striking, though, is the book's connection between the incredible economic growth we've seen since, say, the 19th century.
And our massive use of fossil fuels. It puts that relatively short period of exclusive growth into perspective against the thousands of years of human history that were mostly agrarian.
The argument being that fossil fuels gave us this incredible energy boost, right? Which drove productivity.
Which allowed for the huge population boom and all the specialization of labor that defines the modern world. Without that energy, it wouldn't have happened on that scale.
So the key takeaway there is keeping our machines running, having that reliable energy supply, it's absolutely fundamental to avoiding economic collapse as we currently know it.
Critically important, yes. Which leads directly to the enormous challenge of climate change.
Yeah. The book highlights how dependent we still are on burning fossil fuels. Something like 85% of global energy still comes from them.
And all the greenhouse gases that result. It emphasizes how serious even small increases in global average temperatures are and how fast things are changing now.
Underscoring the need for really drastic cuts in emissions to avoid, well, catastrophic outcomes.
Absolutely. But the book also mentions the rebound effect.
Yeah, that's kind of counterintuitive. You make something more energy efficient.
Like a car engine.
But instead of using less fuel overall, we just drive more or
Right.
buy bigger cars or more people buy cars. So energy use might even go up.
Often, yes. Efficiency gains get eaten up by increased consumption. It happens with lighting, heating, computing power.
So that raises a really fundamental question, doesn't it? Is our current model of economic growth just inherently tied to using more and more energy?
It certainly seems to have been, historically. And can renewables really scale up to replace the sheer energy density and on-demand availability of fossil fuels? That's a huge debate.
And the challenges aren't just about generating clean energy. The book talks about materials too, right?
Yes, the metals needed for solar panels, wind turbines, batteries, all our electronics. Copper, lithium, cobalt, rare earths.
They're becoming harder and more expensive to extract.
In many cases, yes, requiring more energy to mine and process lower-grade ores. It's a kind of feedback loop. You need more energy to get the materials to build the things that produce more energy.
And peak oil comes up too.
Right. The idea that the production of conventional, easy-to-get crude oil likely peaked around 2006.
So we rely more on unconventional stuff now, like shale oil or tar sands.
We do. But the book points out the declining EREI energy return on energy invested for these sources.
Meaning
You have to spend much more energy drilling, fracking, processing to get a barrel of usable oil out than you used to. The net energy gain is shrinking.
that sounds concerning,
Yeah.
especially since oil is still king for transport.
Overwhelmingly, around 95% of transportation fuel. And transport is the lifeblood of our globalized economy, moving goods and people.
Oil's energy density, how easy it is to store and move,
Yeah.
that's what enabled globalization on the current scale.
Arguably, yes. It's uniquely suited for that.
So switching all those trucks, ships, planes to electric or something else,
Mhm.
it's a massive, massive undertaking.
Huge, and it'll take decades. If our oil supply can't keep up with demand, or if we deliberately restrict it because of climate change before alternatives are fully scaled,
Then our capacity to move stuff shrinks,
hmm,
which would likely shrink GDP.
that's the logical consequence, yes. It could mean a significant economic contraction, or at least a radical restructuring.
So the dilemma is really stark. Our amazing machine-driven productivity relies on these fossil fuels,
Which are finite and cause climate change.
and switching to renewables faces its own huge energy and resource challenges.
It's a complex knot of problems, and understanding this energy foundation, along with how money works and the limits of GDP, it really sets the stage for looking at financial markets.
Which the book just starts to touch on towards the end of the sections we looked at.
Right. It reminds us that these deposit banks create money by making loans to all sorts of people and companies.
And that leads into the whole world of finance. How are these funds channeled? What are stocks, bonds, derivatives?
Exactly. We'll have to save the nitty-gritty of financial instruments for another deep dive, but having this groundwork on money, GDP, and energy is absolutely essential context.
It really is. It shows how these things we often treat separately. Money, growth, energy, environment are all deeply interconnected.
And shaped by fundamental choices, assumptions, and increasingly physical limits.
Okay, so as we start to wrap up this deep dive into Tout presque, what are some of the really big takeaways that stand out for you?
Hmm. Well, first, definitely the idea that economics isn't some neutral science. It's fundamentally political. The rules, the goals, their choices.
Yeah, that the rules aren't just natural. We make them.
Second, that mind-bending concept of money creation. That it's not this fixed, scarce thing, but something banks actively create through lending. That really challenges basic assumptions.
It absolutely does. And then, for me, getting that clear picture of GDP, what it actually measures, yes, but also all the crucial things it misses.
Right, like the environment, unpaid work, inequality,
Yeah.
and the political reasons it stays dominant despite those flaws.
And finally, that sobering look at energy. How utterly dependent our current prosperity is on fossil fuels, and the monumental scale of the challenges in moving away from them.
Yeah, the energy and resource constraints are huge. Which leads to a really provocative thought, perhaps, for you listening.
Go on.
If the amount of money isn't the fundamental bottleneck we often assume it is, then what are the real limitations shaping our economic future?
Is it political will? Is it environmental limits kicking in? Resource scarcity? Energy return on investment? Technological hurdles?
Or some complex mix of all of them? It forces you to look beyond just the financial headlines, doesn't it?
It really does. And, given how intertwined economics and politics are, as the book argues, how can we, as more informed individuals, maybe play a bigger role in shaping those economic rules?
How do we push for a system that maybe reflects our shared values and long-term goals a bit better?
Definitely food for thought.
Yeah.
We really encourage you to mull over these ideas. Maybe even check out the source material if you're curious.
Keep those critical thinking gears turning.
Absolutely. Until our next deep dive, thanks for joining us.